as everyone here knows, Raul and I work on a ton of different things, so bear with us as we a lot of what we're going to talk about today is evolving really quickly. So if you have a lot of thoughts and opinions and so on, just we'll have some space for conversation at the end. Definitely bring it up, and we'll also grab us later on. But we think that this is going to be pretty cool for the project. We're going to be structuring two groups for the project. One is going to be a libp2p foundation to orient the governance of the project, and a core fund to kickstart a lot of funding in the project. But that won't be like the only. We hope that will be a start to many other funds forming. And so yeah, that's like in a nutshell what we're here to talk about. Pass over to Raul. And we're both have longtime libp2p contributors. We both led the project at different points in time. We are, it's very near and dear to our hearts. We love this project a ton, and we want to support it as best we can.
Absolutely. So thanks a lot for that intro, Juan. I just wanted to kind of like, first of all, do a little review of the impact that libp2p has had over the course of many years and put that impact in numbers on a number of categories, right? It's huge. It's all across the space. First of all, wanted to talk about how many libp2p nodes are running in the world, right? This is a fraction of the reality, and this is a fraction, so it's 321K nodes, unique nodes per month. And this is only a fraction because we have very little telemetry that is able to tap into all the networks that are actually, that you'll see in the next slide, are actually powered by libp2p. So you can see a small breakdown there. Of course, there is Ethereum, Polkadot, Filecoin, IPFS, DHT client nodes, and servers, and many more in unprobed networks, right? So we're talking about massive numbers here. On the other hand, we also have counted the number of active contributors on the libp2p org. On a monthly basis, that's around 100 unique active contributors just on libp2p orgs, right? On the libp2p org. But there are many implementations that actually live outside of the libp2p org. There are components, modules. libp2p is a modular networking stack, so many of those modules actually live outside of the libp2p org. And it exists that way by design, right? So we're not able to count those contributors yet across the space, but it's actually a multiple of that. And then on the other hand, on the code level, there is libp2p is depended on by a ton of repos, right? We just counted Go, Rust, and JS as kind of like the three major implementations there, and like look at the numbers. It's just outstanding, right? So it's very clear that libp2p is fulfilling a ton of needs for a lot of people, and a lot of networks are finding benefit in it. And I just wanted to kind of like give you a sense of the breadth and amplitude of networks that actually depend on libp2p, and I wanted to map that dependence on just a number. What number could I pick? That was market cap, right? This is like five days ago, and things have obviously fluctuated quite a bit. You can see kind of like, you know, this huge list of networks. Notable ones are the Ethereum Foundation and the Ethereum network with the adoption of libp2p for ETH2, Polygon, Polkadot, Filecoin, Chainlink, Optimism, as well as many others, and Celestia as well. We're friends at Celestia. Many other networks there, and also projects that are not financially, like, do not have an economic circuitry, and therefore we're not able to count or kind of like lock down that particular number. Things like obviously IPFS and Bertie and others are depending on libp2p, and there are 8 libp2p implementations to date. This has been growing. This grew from like literally 2 that were the ones that were extracted from IPFS, Go IPFS and JS IPFS back in the day. That was complemented by Rust libp2p, which was created by the folks at Parity. And then along came NIM, Kotlin, Swift, .NET, and C++, and many of these we kickstarted with other foundations in the scope of their own networks and their own launches, right? So this is like a massive, building up to kind of like a massive success story of what, and kind of like the importance of libp2p in the general Web3 space, right? libp2p is underpinning basically the networking for all of these networks, right? And not just those networks, but also the L2s that those networks power, right? So if we kind of like put a magnifier on Optimism, Polkadot, and Polygon, for example, and kind of like, you know, deep dive into some of the L2s that they're powering, that those numbers increase even more, right? And like the breadth of libp2p penetration and implementation across the space is very pervasive. And this, just to kind of like sum it all up in a single number, libp2p as of 5 days ago is securing a total market cap of $300 billion US at the networking layer, right? And the network, like, you know, I think a lot of people in this room, we're here because we truly understand the importance of like of the networking layer and having robust foundations for everything that we build on top of in Web3. Basically, it relies on having robust and solid networking layers that are censorship resistant, as Juan said, that are secure, that are resilient and interoperable, built on interoperable standards, right? So I just wanted to kind of like touch on that recap first in terms of the projects and the value that those networks are securing, but also wanted to, you know, put the focus on the people. And you probably, if you look at that slide, you might find your face there. This is, we mined some of the GitHub repos of the libp2p org and others for contributor faces, and like, you know, this is a project built by people, right? Lots of people, and those people work across a number of communities. So we've got Go, Rust, JVM, JS, NIM, just on that slide, and there's many more individuals that we weren't able to fit in there. And basically, well, the point that I'm trying to bring home here is that hundreds of open source contributors across the globe really care about libp2p. They build and maintain libp2p implementations. They research, develop, discuss, and review specs, which are the core of the implementations themselves. They care deeply about robust networking layers and the future of libp2p, and they also recognize the criticality. So with this, I wanted to hand it off to Juan to talk about the funding history here.
Yeah, so in the past, libp2p has been funded by a lot of groups. So we started the project at Protocol Labs, and we've built at least 2 implementations, the Go implementation and the JS implementation. Over time, we started working with Parity and the Web3 Foundation to build the Rust libp2p implementation. And then after that, we expanded to 5 additional implementations with the Ethereum Foundation and many other groups. And I want to do a special call out for Celestia. I'll talk about a little bit more later about what they did recently, which was really cool. And then in addition to those groups, there's a lot of other groups that have given grants to people working on libp2p things to solve their problem. So many of these that I don't even know who they are. I want to be able to find who they are and be able to credit them and put them in some board. So if you know some group that like has funded libp2p things, please tell me. The other thing is, all of the implementation maintainers, even if they might have gotten a grant initially, they end up doing a lot of work that often doesn't get covered by those grants, and that becomes important funding of that work. And also users of libp2p end up contributing and so on. So all of that comes from various organizations. I want to highlight 2 key moments: the Ethereum 2 and growth of the implementations and getting vibe. Actually, Raul, you probably want to tell this story.
I can tell the story, yeah. Yeah, so I think this was a pivotal moment for libp2p, and it was also, I don't know if there are people, yeah, well, Adrian was there, of course, you're actually like cited in one of these screenshots, and I think, I don't know if there were people, yeah, Anton was there as well, yeah, of course, JVM libp2p. Yeah, this was a pivotal moment for libp2p where it kind of like went from securing things like IPFS and Filecoin and small other networks into really securing ETH2, and with very good reasons. And also, like, that whole process kickstarted the implementation of 4 new libraries that didn't exist up until then. Things like, for example, Pi libp2p, JVM libp2p, I think NIM libp2p as well. And I think that, I'm not sure if CP libp2p is one of those, but yeah, that basically there were new implementations that kickstarted from this. A big moment was everything that happened around ETH Berlin SWI. So this was the 2nd edition of ETH Berlin. And they kind of like spotlighted libp2p, and that was because large swaths of the community were recognizing the importance of infrastructure and really low-level infrastructure as kind of like the core basis on top of which our networks are built. If there's a flaw at that level, everything else is it could be a house of cards, right? So people started recognizing the importance of that, and during this event, I think it was one of those initial times where libp2p really started extending dev grants and started like kickstarting the public funding in a more open way. We put out a call for 7 bounties, I think it was 7 bounties, and things like, for example, the libp2p noise handshake implementation, which was developed by somebody at ChainSafe who claimed that bounty and landed the first proof of concept and was done like in record time in 2 days. Things like that are basically used by many networks nowadays that superseded things like SecIO. If you were here back in the days in libp2p, that was kind of like the default handshake choice. Emerged from this whole story of public funding. We also had that was the moment where ETH was deciding whether to adopt or not things like Gossip Sub, and whether Gossip Sub was going to be kind of like one of the drivers for libp2p adoption. So we needed a ton more instrumentation, analysis, simulation, thread analysis, kind of like tools. And Proto Lambda was actually the person that back in the day who was working in the research team that claimed this particular bounty. And there's a tweet that he put out a few days ago, and kind of like, narrating his story across the ETH space. And yeah, there's us hacking there, getting that thing to work, right? Things like, for example, I think Cayman talked about TypeScript in JS libp2p as well, and the evolution from JS to TypeScript. We actually had a bounty to create TypeScript bindings as a starting point, and this was like 3 years ago, right? We also worked closely with Adrian, with Jacek Siaka from Status, and from Proto Lambda, and Danny Ryan as well on the ETH2 networking specification, which really enshrined libp2p as the choice for that, and kind of like laid out the protocol choices and the rationale behind those, and the messages and the Y-level formats and so on. And this was kind of like a joint effort as well, right? Between, a true testament, first of all, of like, the collaborative nature of ETH2 itself within the multi-client space that ETH2 was set out to deliver in, plus also with the libp2p team and the libp2p community, right? So I think this was definitely a story of, great collaboration and a pivotal moment for libp2p.
And that moment set the foundations for a lot of the other projects that then adopted libp2p after that and ended up benefiting from all that work. So another big moment I wanted to call out was the recent Celestia airdrop. So Celestia did this really awesome thing of going to find a whole set of core repositories and projects and just gave a broad airdrop to all of the contributors to those projects. That's stuff that we've been wanting to do for a very long time. Like when there's like an old podcast where I talked about like, oh, it would be great to like be able to propagate rewards and distributions to like all of the contributors to the software building up a project. And it was kind of like early public goods funding mechanism thinking, and it's been so awesome to see that happen. And so that was a really cool moment. There's a possibility of another cool moment like that with the Optimism round 3 that's coming up. We'll see what happens. So as a whole, these are all stories about just the triumph of libp2p coming together, of the crypto community in general coming together to build a shared good, a shared public good for everybody. The work that we all do makes all of these networks more resilient. The work that we all do makes these networks better, like specific research projects, specific new protocols, new debugging tooling, new UIs to understand like the traffic, censorship persistence work. All of this stuff ends up improving everyone's stack. And so this is like the hallmark of an amazing thing that all of us together have been contributing to. And so now it's time to take that kind of de facto public good and structure it as one. And so this is the main thing we wanted to talk to you about. So do you want to go through this, or I can do it? So now we've just talked about like all of the awesome things about libp2p. Now let's talk about some of the key challenges that we're dealing with. So first off, PL has been largely stewarding the project for a while. We've been supporting a lot of the specs, a lot of the security work, a lot of the coordination of groups. This is very driven by a lot of various PL priorities that pushed in other directions, which is unfair to the libp2p project, right? A lot of the other things that PL has needed to do have defocus some amount of our work on libp2p, and it would be great to get into a stable foundation for libp2p, where the project can grow on its own, independent of whatever other priorities the various groups supporting have. This also led to, like, just in terms of ease for a single group, non-transparent budgets with the community, not unclear funding mechanisms for contributors, a lot of discretionary stuff across various groups. So this is not just PL, but like all of the different funding groups have like their own structures. Sometimes those don't clearly align with the teams that are actually doing a lot of the work. So we just told a bunch of really good stories of where it worked. There's a lot of stories of where it didn't work, where some people put an enormous amount of time and effort into doing some things, and sometimes that ended up like not even completing because they ran out of funding or they had to refocus on something else. So there's lots of interesting, valuable contributions that are there that haven't yet realized the value. There's also this huge asymmetry between like the broad adoption and the kind of benefits of libp2p and the contribution. So there's lots of groups that are benefiting from a lot of this work, but not contributing proportionally. So we want to right-size that to create a structure that is very good for the project as a whole and for all the stakeholders. For public goods to really succeed in the long term and become not just sustained, but growing, you need the groups that are benefiting from those things to contribute proportionally to their upkeep and so on, right? So we have to fund the commons that we're all benefiting from. And then there are clear things that we've been wanting to do for a long time and just have had to backlog forever. Things like creating this great broader community roadmap with do like this broad stakeholder survey of like what everybody wants to work on, all the different areas for research, all the different areas for tool building and so on, that all of us think would be so critical to have. And we've just had to backburner that for like 3 or 4 years in a row, and like that sucks, right? And so like it would be great to be able to do all of that. So for that, we're going to create these two groups, the libp2p Foundation and the libp2p Core Fund. So talking about the foundation very briefly, because this talk is more about the Core Fund, this is going to be a separate group with independent project governance as its main goal. It's going to be a very lightweight foundation meant for long-term governance of the project. It's going to drive the project mission and vision. It's going to oversee broad spec and community processes. libp2p has this great benefit of being a modular structure and stack, which means that people don't have to argue very much about things. If you don't like a protocol, just make your own. Fork it and make your own, and add it to the toolbox. libp2p is this amazing, massive toolbox, and disagreement can just turn into more protocols. There are some layers where folks have to agree, and that might be in like the core connectivity part, and that might be where the stewarding of the spec becomes more important. In addition to that, there's kind of the broad brand of libp2p and so on. Like so far, libp2p has had tremendous success in the crypto community, but there's an enormous amount of potential for libp2p to grow into all of the mainstream networking stacks. We designed it that way from the very beginning to try and be this incredibly malleable runtime that enables connectivity between any device or any program in any stack. And libp2p has that potential, but in order to realize that, we need to create a project that can then be adopted by the broader mainstream networking folks, right? So think of like large groups like Cisco and like all of the router people and so on. And for that, we're going to need some kind of structure that supports those groups coming to the project. And we hope that over the long term, the libp2p can like steer the broad network innovation of like areas that we should be heading towards. Cool. So that's kind of what the foundation is going to do. Now, but that's very long-term oriented stuff. Let's talk about the Core Fund. This is what's more important short to medium term. A lot of the folks here have needs. Like you have clear pictures of what you would like the libp2p project to do. And we want to be able to create a vehicle that can satisfy that. So we're leaning on a crypto-native funding structure for this particular fund because we've seen an enormous amount of successes recently with good public goods funding mechanisms in the crypto community. We're going to be raising funding from a lot of libp2p stakeholders. And we're going to leverage community decision-making in how we allocate that funding. So this one is a really key thing. We want to be able to enable the funding that comes from the stakeholders to be routed by both those stakeholders, but also, crucially, the implementation maintainers and the users of the stack to orient the entire community towards funding and developing the things that the community wants to see happen. I'll talk about how we're going to do that in a moment. And so in this fund, we'll just deploy funding to teams, projects, individuals that are working across the stack. And we'll be using both proactive mechanisms like grants and so on, and retroactive mechanisms like RetroPGF. So this is kind of a map of how we see the libp2p core fund fitting. You can see the funders, or you can think of them as like LPs in a traditional VC sort of setting, are funding that fund, or potentially other funds. We want to create an environment where other funds can prop up and outdo the core fund. Like if you have a better idea of how to fund libp2p, go for it. We're gonna even support you on going to do that, because we want a network to develop here. And then we also want to enable a lot of you to create thematic funds that can go after specific areas. Like if you think oh man, it would be great to develop a bunch of pub/sub protocols, and we need to improve that layer, or we need privacy or censorship resistance or DHTs or whatever you think that is needed, and you need to create some funding allocations there, and the normal mechanisms of the fund aren't working for you, go create a fund and pitch the core fund for funding, and then you can go and allocate that funding. And so we're going to create this cool funding network environment. And of course, that funding will flow to the teams, people, and projects that are working on the software, and that therefore benefiting the community. And so the way that we're going to structure the libp2p core fund is with three main vehicles, within it. We're going to use a DAO voting structure, a GP voting structure, and RetroPGF. So there are two proactive mechanisms and one retroactive. So GP voting is just a shorthand for the normal traditional thing that you think of when you hear grants. There's a grant program. There's a committee that is reviewing those grants and commenting on them, and they are assigning their best knowledge of what should happen in the decisions. We want to push a lot of the decision making for the proactive stuff into the DAO voting area. We're going to be very involved in commenting on those proposals as well to give all of our thinking and so on. But we want to create the space for all of you to voice what you think should be funded and to vote. We're going to have some voting structures that include things like whether or not you're an implementation maintainer, whether or not you're a major application stakeholder, whether or not you're a funder of the fund itself. So things like that will become kind of relevant in how we do the DAO voting. And we expect this to fund all of these kinds of things here on the slide, from implementations to spec design to greenfield new project, like new libraries, new components, new protocols, broad R&D, open-end maintenance, core infrastructure. So there's a whole bunch of core infrastructure work that is required to maintain the network, community tooling, and so on. Then more news on what mechanisms we'll use and so on in 2024. We're going to be developing all of this through November, December, and early Q1. And so stay tuned for how we're going to do that. And then the GP voting, we expect that to orient this much more to very time-sensitive things, like security-oriented things, or bets where we think the community doesn't yet. We might try something through the community, and the community doesn't yet quite see why this is important, but we might think it's really crucial. So then we might deploy through that. And then aside from this, we're strong believers in the retroactive funding structure, and we think that is going to be in the long term really valuable. And so we want to shift a large amount of the funding into a mechanism like that. So we want to enable that same group of voters to then also allocate a portion of the funding retroactively. So you're rewarding the things that turned out to be valuable without having to go through a proposal process ahead of time. We'll be learning a lot from the OP RetroPGF structure and how they've been doing it to then set up this mechanism. And we aim to initially start with some split here where we really are trying the retroactive funding in significant size, and where we are pushing as much as we can into the DAO voting layer. Cool. So we're going to go through a whole fundraise process over the next few weeks and months. We're going to be contacting a lot of the stakeholders and so on. From our estimate, the core maintenance of the project requires between 2 to 2.5 million, and so we PL have contributed half of that, and we're like committing to contribute half of what the yearly maintenance of the project needs. But we would love to raise even more from the whole community to grow the project. So we don't just want to get to basic continuity and security. We want to grow the project to go achieve all of the awesome things that we've been talking about today, and that you are probably thinking about that we haven't been talking about yet and we want to hear about. So various groups can contribute to this. And I wanted to also plug the Telegram group for today, so make sure you join that if you aren't there already, where we're going to keep this conversation going. I really want all of your feedback on the broad plans that we have here, the structure, any questions that you might have, both for core fund and the foundation. Again, foundation, we're probably going to defer for a little bit of like exactly how to orient it. We want to kind of get a lot of teams funded first. But yeah, maybe I'll stop here because I know that we probably are running late. Do we have time for questions? Yeah, absolutely. It's really important. All right, awesome. So let's maybe shift to questions, or Raul, any last things that you wanted to mention before we? Okay, awesome. So questions from everybody, and we'd really love your feedback on what we're doing here. And like I mentioned in the beginning, it's evolving quickly, so we might come up with like another amazing idea in like a few weeks and be like, actually, but this is the broad thing that we're going for. Yeah, back there.
Thanks for the talk. Do other funds need to implement the same structure as the core fund, or?
No, you can use whatever you want. So we hope that when we create the structure, we create the information about who is who in the community, probably on a chain somewhere. And hopefully other funds can just use it. But if they come up with another mechanism, that's cool too. Like we want to create an experiment, like we want to create an environment where anybody can look at the project and say, I have a better idea of how to improve the project, and just go do it. So we don't want any of this. And it's one of the key reasons why we separated the foundation from the core fund. We don't want to rate limit the funding of the project based on the opinions of the long-term governance structure. And so we want to enable groups to just go and have their cake and eat it too if other people want that kind of cake.
Yep.
So whatever.
Thank you.
I have one question, like how you can identify the good project, like just like every investment. So we want it to return something, maybe like for public good and for people. So yeah.
Yeah. So here we're going to lean on. We've worked a lot on many grant processes over the many years, so we have a lot of institutional knowledge on how to pick projects. In addition to that, lots of the crypto community have shown good discipline in proposal voting and investing in things and talking with a community about where to deploy the funding. And we see a lot of this in some really well-functioning DAOs. And so we're going to lean on that. It is going to be a lot of work, though. It is going to be a lot of work to kind of discuss all of that and think about it. One thing that I'm also really excited about is, maybe I'll mention two things. One is OS Observer, Open Source Observer, is a tool that is getting developed now to have metrics and measurement on the impact of very specific projects. So we hope that that tooling is going to be able to tell us what funding is having what impact, especially in the retroactive side. And the other thing I'll mention is I actually think the GPTs, the new large language models have a large capability at making these kinds of decisions very well. And so we're going to be experimenting with that and seeing if there's something valuable there where we can have like, like the P2P GPT that P2P funder GPT that like looks at the whole thing and recommends what it thinks, and it's like a voter in the DAO, right? It's like, here's what P2P GPT thinks.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to kind of like acquire another data point to measure a proposal as well. I think we want to close the loop as well from the end of the proposal side towards the end of the implementation side as well, because like we're prioritizing work actually getting in the hands of developers and users, right? So we don't want to end up in a place where a particular proposal is raised and like a group of people believe that is a good proposal, but then ultimately where the endpoint of that proposal is to get the work merged into a particular set of repos, and the maintainers don't think that code has been developed in the right way, and it ends up in the hands of nowhere. So we want to kind of like close the loop and figure out the mechanisms by which we can also give kind of like the maintainers and the developers and adopters and users that are ultimately going to be consuming that code a say in the process since the a vote in the proposal since the very beginning of the funnel.
Okay, so I have a question about implementation of the DAO. Is this going to be like an actual like smart contract you want to run somewhere, and all the companies will have like sort of like stake in there proportional to the amount of funding they give to the DAO, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we do want an on-chain sort of structure. We don't want just raw, like we would love to implement it with having categories of like each individual and each organization having a set of labels and categories, because many people are like researchers and core maintainers, or core maintainers and funders, or whatever. And so we want to be able to like elicit what those different categories of voters think. And so we're not just going to do some straight single unit number voting. We're going to have a little bit more sophisticated thing there. We might start with the naive approach first, just to get it off the ground, but we want to have a more sophisticated way of eliciting the opinion from the very like key stakeholder groups to understand what to do. So for example, if there's like a key proposal about important, valuable research areas, and all of the research groups are like very highly in favor, but maybe a lot of the maybe a bunch of the applications like aren't in favor, then that tells us something about like how the research is being communicated. That tells us that the applications aren't thinking about those things, or the applications don't need that. And so it just forces the conversation to be more accurate about what's going on. And that kind of information we lost if we just did a single voting thing. Now on what chain and so on, like I don't know, we'll figure that out later, because I definitely don't want to start like a chain competition of like which chain gets to host the libp2p DAO. So I don't know.
A little follow
maybe
up.
the biggest funder. No, I'm just kidding.
A little follow-up on the timelines of these. Like, how soon do you expect this to start or to finish?
We're going to start fundraising on this like now in November, and I don't know how fast it'll go. Like, we'll see. It could be a few weeks, could be a few months. We're gonna keep doing this too, because maybe we hit the ground running and suddenly we hit like a large-scale amount of funding, and that would be awesome. Certainly, once the crypto bull market returns, I expect that this is gonna, if we create the structure properly here, we could, by the time the bull market happens, supercharge the libp2p project. It would be amazing if by like 2020, late 24, 25, we suddenly have a ton of funding going into all the research areas that we care about. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Just one thing, I would say that like this part of what you're seeing here is also kind of like the way that we're presenting the value and the worth of libp2p to potential funders. So if there's something that you think, a particular thing that we haven't mentioned that you think like it would be worth mentioning to make the case, to make sure that we hit those funding targets and make the case even stronger, then feel free to let us know.
Yeah, and I would say like either email us or even better, Telegram us through here. Like just make it an open conversation. Just send all your recs, join the libp2p Day Telegram group, and like just thought dump on whatever you have as suggestions. It'll be great for all of us to hear all of those suggestions and kind of like some community sense making happening on like what we should do. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the role of the funding allocation mechanism, so GP and DAO voting and retro PGF. Is the idea that funders can like choose one of those and you guys are like building out tools for them, or is the funding contingent on them using one of those, or can they pick their own, or how does that work?
The way we're going to orient it is like think of the funders that want to fund us, the core fund like people. We raise the funding and we say here's how we're gonna run it. We're gonna allocate it this way, and the reason for that is that we have a large thesis here about how we can create success here, and so we want the funders to that want to fund us to agree. However, we're going to be giving all of the funders significant decision-making power in both the DAO voting structure and the retro PGF structure. So if they lean more in one direction, like the DAO side of reviewing proposals and commenting, great. Many funders don't want to do that. Many funders want to be like, just I don't want to know. Just like don't waste my time. Please just figure it out for me. And we want to enable those funders to do it, while at the same time creating space for the funders that no, actually, we really care about these specific things, and we want the funding to route in that direction. The retro side is like, we think that there's a very important bet there to make as a whole ecosystem. And so we would love to make that mechanism work. And I think right now it's still very new. So a lot of funders will be like hesitant about it, but we think we should try it. And so that's why we're going to start with large split to retro PGF. And we're going to measure and evaluate how well it works over time. So we're going to tune, think of those edges, from the, I should draw a little circle here, but like think of there being a circle here. And these are like percentages, I guess, of the funding every year. And so we'll tune these based on impact evidence that we see downstream.
Thanks.
However, like once we get this going, we highly encourage other groups to create other funds. Like go eat our lunch. We would be very thankful if you go eat our lunch.
Yeah, and the reason for that as well is that in some cases it's easier to actually create a vehicle if you really want to see a set of outcomes across the entire stack. Like, for example, in terms of privacy, in terms of discovery, in terms of like reader-writer privacy, as I said, or ZK or anything like that down the road. If you want to see, like, if you want to have a set of cross-cutting initiatives, it might be way easier to actually start a thematic fund to make those outcomes happen across the stack than to have to convince a single monolithic fund that, like, now they need to suddenly also be prioritizing a whole set of projects that all are connected with one singular outcome.
Yeah, like, so for example, if we do all of the work of onboarding all of the DAO voters and the retro PGF people and so on, and then all of that infrastructure is there, and you can just spin up a thematic fund and then like go talk to those groups and like raise funding. Awesome, like great, success. The ecosystem got funded. We're happy. Great. As you have more thoughts and opinions or ideas on like who we should talk to about this, please let us know on the Telegram group or email us or whatever. We're going to be contacting a lot of folks, and we want to end up with like a really good, robust funding ecosystem for the whole project, so that we can do like all of the awesome. We can keep the awesome things going, but so that we can solve a lot of the pain points that we've been talking about. Cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.